That's something to pay attention to when you're profile building, right? To not treat it as a checkbox exercise, but instead focus on, in fact, just focusing on activities that will help with positioning you or at least growing your career to a point where you can say you're one of the top professionals. That in itself should also help you meet at least three criteria, right? Because if I guess there are exceptions to this, but for most people, say you're in tech, if you are a director or a VP, you're probably going to get invited to speak at events, to especially if you're at a big company, to judge competitions, maybe even to write scholarly articles. But you should be focusing on that one thing that makes you a top professional.
Yeah, so all the activities should support that one thing that makes you a top expert. I don't know if that's always going to be immediately apparent. Like you could be a top expert and hold a position at a top company and not receive a lot of these invitations just because you may have closed yourself off to that early in your career. But once you start kind of opening back up and engaging, it is easier to obtain those kinds of invitations. So if you are younger in your career and you're actively soliciting a lot of those and opening yourself up, just make sure that the things that you're doing go to prove your expertise and aren't just things to check off a list. So, for example, if you are a software engineer, you can do things like judge the Globies and Stevies, and you can do things like engage in peer review for conferences. You can do things like get various speaking engagements at conferences. You can write a few technical articles. You can even become a member in a bunch of these associations if you have a project and do a satisfactory application with some support from senior members. I mean, you can build a profile that meets at least the minimum qualifications in these criteria. But if you are a software engineer working on a ton of different software projects, none of which relates to the other, and maybe you're full stack, so you haven't really dived into a particular area of expertise, it's really hard to put together an EB-1A case because you can't say, I am an expert in this. You maybe can if everything you've judged is judging people with a particular niche, if all the conference presentations you've done are about a particular niche, and if the articles you've written are also about that particular niche. So don't feel like you can't build your profile, but I see too many people going about it all wrong, where they're just kind of targeting all of these different things, but not even really thinking, what is my field and how have I risen to the top of it? So be careful with that. It is hard to build a profile as a younger applicant. And it may take a lot more time than people are telling you. It's worth putting in that time, especially if you were born in India, but maybe not 6 months. It might be 2 or 3 years. For some of you, it might even be more like 5 years. So it's doable, but develop your own expertise first. Treat that as the core, and then arrange all of your activities around that.
So is it better do you want to pick something if you're still early on in this process and then profile build around that area?
Yeah, it depends on you and your career aspirations. I think the earlier you pick a niche, the better it's going to be for your EB1 case. But in tech, if you pick the wrong niche and that niche goes out of style or fashion or something else takes over and moves on, you might have picked the wrong thing too early. So sometimes it is about balance. You want to prove your expertise in a specific thing, but keep your career options open. You don't have to do everything in your career to target EB1A. Some of your activities can be a little bit more broad, especially if you're giving yourself a longer timeline. If you give yourself a 5-year timeline, you're giving yourself a lot more freedom. And if you're just starting out, especially if you're a recent grad, a 5-year timeline is not bad. You could look at that and it would be a solid plan for you.